Welcome back to Mystery Minds, the channel where we dive into the darkest corners of true crime, uncovering stories that shock, intrigue, and leave us questioning the world around us. In today's case, we unravel the terrifying rise of a criminal empire that extends its shadow across the globe. This is the story of the Russian Mafia, the Bratva's global reach. A tale of power, fear, and unrelenting ambition. This case will leave you questioning. How can a secretive organization rooted in the crumbling Soviet Union infiltrate the most powerful nations on Earth? And how far will it go to secure its grip? Stay with us as we unravel the dark and far-reaching story of the Bratva. In 2018, the quiet suburbs of London became the unlikely stage for a chilling revelation. A sprawling network of organized crime so vast it operated in plain sight, leaving trails of blood, betrayal, and billions of stolen dollars. This was no ordinary gang. This was the Bratva. The story begins in the waning days of the Soviet Union, a crumbling superpower teetering on the edge of collapse. Across the vast nation, factories ground to a halt. Shelves in stores stood empty, and the citizens, once proud participants in a collective ideal, struggled to survive amid an economy spiraling out of control. In this chaos, law and order became fragile concepts, easily bent or outright broken. The void left by a collapsing state created fertile ground for opportunists, criminals, and visionaries of a darker kind. It was during this time of desperation that the Vori Zakon, the thieves in law, emerged as a dominant force. With roots tracing back to the gulags of Stalinist Russia, this brotherhood of professional criminals adhered to a strict code of loyalty, secrecy, and defiance against authority. For decades they operated in the shadows, their power concentrated within prisons and black market networks. But the collapse of the Soviet Union presented an unprecedented opportunity. With the state crumbling, the Vori saw the chance to expand their influence beyond the underground and into mainstream society. What began as an alliance of thieves and smugglers soon evolved into a vast and interconnected criminal syndicate, the Bratva, or the Russian Mafia. Unlike their predecessors, the Bratva were not content with mere survival or regional dominance. They were visionaries of power, ambition, and control, and they thrived on the chaos of the transition from communism to capitalism. As state-owned industries were sold off in hurried and corrupt privatizations, the Bratva positioned themselves as both predators and power brokers. They seized opportunities that others could not, exploiting the greed of officials and the desperation of ordinary citizens. In the small industrial town of Togliatti, a seemingly insignificant event symbolized the Bratva's rise. A state-owned car factory, one of the largest employers in the region, was privatized in the early 1990s. Workers given vouchers meant to represent their share in the company, quickly sold them for cash to survive another day. Those vouchers ended up in the hands of a shadowy group of men connected to the Bratva. Within months, they controlled the factory, siphoning profits while workers' wages dwindled. It was a microcosm of a larger pattern happening across the country. Where others saw the ruins of a fallen empire, the Bratva saw the foundation of a criminal empire. Their tactics were ruthless and highly strategic. Extortion became a primary tool. Business owners were given a choice: pay for protection or face consequences that ranged from arson to outright murder. For many, the choice was clear, and the Bratva quickly amassed vast sums of money. But they didn't stop there. They diversified their operations, engaging in smuggling, arms trafficking, and drug distribution. The Bratva's members were not merely criminals, they were entrepreneurs of chaos, adept at manipulating the volatile environment to their advantage. One of their most chilling innovations was their use of violence as a form of public relations. When a rival gang attempted to muscle in on a Bratva-controlled shipping route in St. Petersburg, the result was not a covert retaliation but a gruesome public spectacle. A dozen members of the rival gang were found executed, their bodies displayed in a manner that sent a clear message: the Bratva were untouchable. This willingness to act with impunity, combined with their uncanny ability to corrupt officials, ensured their dominance. The Bratva's leadership understood the importance of loyalty and secrecy. Initiation into the organization was a ritualistic process that bound new members to the group through blood oaths and brutal hazing. Once inside, betrayal was met with swift and merciless retribution. The Bratva were not just a gang, they were a brotherhood, united by a code that superseded familial ties, national laws, and even personal survival. As the 1990s progressed, their influence spread beyond Russia's borders. Refugees fleeing economic collapse and war carried with them not only their personal belongings but also connections to the Bratva. In Brighton Beach, Brooklyn, an enclave of Russian immigrants, the Bratva established their first stronghold in the United States. Through a combination of intimidation and manipulation, they took control of local businesses and expanded into racketeering, fraud, and drug trafficking. While their power grew abroad, they continued to dominate at home. They forged alliances with corrupt politicians, co-opted law enforcement, and even influenced the nascent Russian oligarchy. These partnerships were mutually beneficial. The Bratva provided muscle and money, while their political allies granted protection and legitimacy. The Bratva's rise was fueled by a keen understanding of power and fear. They knew when to strike and when to retreat, when to bribe and when to intimidate. Their leaders were not crude thugs, but calculating strategists who studied their enemies as carefully as they studied their opportunities. For them, violence was not an end, but a means, a tool used to secure loyalty, eliminate rivals, and ensure compliance. Despite their growing power, the Bratva remained shrouded in mystery. They operated in the shadows, their true strength obscured by layers of deception. Even those who were victims of their crimes often didn't realize they were dealing with the Bratva. This secrecy was part of their strategy. They understood that fear was most effective when combined with uncertainty. But while the Bratva's rise seemed unstoppable, it also sowed the seeds of their eventual vulnerability. As their operations expanded, so too did the complexity of their organization. They became increasingly reliant on a network of intermediaries, many of whom were driven by greed rather than loyalty. This would create cracks in their seemingly unassailable structure, cracks that law enforcement and rival groups would later exploit. For now, however, the Bratva stood as a testament to the power of adaptation. Born from the ruins of a fallen empire, they had transformed themselves into a global criminal enterprise. Their story was only beginning, but already it was clear that they were unlike any criminal organization the world had ever seen. Where others sought survival, the Bratva sought domination. And in the chaos of the post-Soviet era, they found exactly what they needed to thrive. As the Bratva solidified its grip on Russia, its leaders recognized that true power lay not only in dominating their homeland, but in extending their influence across the globe. The chaos of the post-Soviet era provided a unique opportunity for expansion, and the Bratva seized it with both hands. By the early 1990s, they had begun to infiltrate the West, adapting their methods to exploit the vulnerabilities of more stable societies. Their ambition was no longer regional, it was global. The first major step in this plan came through an alliance with the Colombian cartels. The Bratva saw the immense profits generated by the global drug trade and wanted a share. The Colombians, on the other hand, recognized the Bratva's expertise in smuggling and their growing influence in Eastern Europe, which provided a critical transit route into the lucrative markets of Western Europe. The partnership was mutually beneficial. The Bratva facilitated the movement of vast quantities of cocaine through ports and borders that were poorly policed, often using their extensive shipping networks. In return, they received not only a cut of the profits but also a valuable education in global logistics and money laundering. The influx of drug money posed a new challenge: how to make vast amounts of cash appear legitimate. The Bratva responded with characteristic ingenuity, embedding themselves in the Western financial system. They began laundering their profits through European banks, often by exploiting the deregulation and privatization sweeping through the global economy at the time. Shell companies were established in tax havens, and complex webs of transactions obscured the origins of the funds. In some cases, legitimate businesses were bought outright, providing a front for laundering operations while generating additional income. One of the most striking examples of this strategy unfolded in London. Known as a hub for international finance, the city became a focal point for the Bratva's activities. They purchased high-end properties, often paying in cash, and used them as collateral to secure loans from banks that were either complicit or willfully ignorant. From there, the money flowed into investments across Europe and North America. The Bratva's financial empire grew exponentially, and with it, their ability to operate in plain sight. Their reach wasn't limited to financial institutions. The Bratva recognized the value of infiltrating illegitimate industries, particularly those with global supply chains. In Germany, for example, they acquired stakes in a logistics company, giving them control over shipping routes that spanned continents. Under the guise of legitimate business, they moved everything from counterfeit goods to stolen art and narcotics. These ventures not only generated revenue but also provided an effective cover for their more overtly criminal activities. Meanwhile, a series of violent incidents across Europe began to attract attention. In Berlin, the body of a high-ranking police official was discovered in his car, the victim of a professional assassination. In Italy, a journalist investigating organized crime was killed in a car bombing. At first glance, these events seemed unconnected. However, investigators began to uncover threads linking them to the Bratva. The killings were not random acts of violence, but calculated moves designed to eliminate threats and protect the organization's operations. The scale and precision of these hits were alarming. Law enforcement agencies across Europe struggled to keep up, hampered by jurisdictional boundaries and the Bratva's sophisticated methods of concealment. Every lead seemed to dead end in a maze of false identities, offshore accounts, and untraceable assets. It became increasingly clear that the Bratva operated not as a traditional gang but as a transnational corporation, one with an extensive network of resources and a brutal willingness to use them. In one particularly chilling twist, a promising tech startup in California was revealed to be a front for Bratva activities. The company, which specialized in encrypted communications, had been founded by an individual with no apparent ties to organized crime. However, a deeper investigation uncovered connections to Bratva-linked shell companies in Cyprus and the Cayman Islands. The startup was being used to smuggle encrypted data for cybercrimes, including ransomware attacks and intellectual property theft. The revelation shocked the tech world and underscored the Bratva's adaptability. The Bratva's ability to corrupt and co-opt legitimate systems was one of its most dangerous traits. They targeted individuals in positions of power, offering bribes, coercion, or outright threats to secure their cooperation. In one case, a customs official at a major European port was found to have facilitated the smuggling of millions of dollars worth of contraband. When confronted, the official admitted to receiving payments from intermediaries tied to the Bratva. However, it was later revealed that the bribes were accompanied by veiled threats against his family, leaving him with little choice but to comply. Despite these revelations, prosecuting the Bratva proved almost impossible. Their operations were layered with redundancy, ensuring that the capture of one operative or the exposure of one scheme did not compromise the entire organization. Witnesses often refused to testify, fearing retribution, and those who did rarely survived long enough to see justice served. In some instances, judges and prosecutors were targeted, further complicating efforts to bring the Bratva to account. Perhaps the most unnerving aspect of the Bratva's expansion was their ability to exploit the very systems designed to prevent such infiltration. In the United States, for example, they used immigration laws to bring operatives into the country, presenting them as political refugees or legitimate business people. Once established, these individuals built networks that funneled money, drugs, and stolen goods back to the Bratva's central operations. By the late 1990s, the Bratva had established itself as a truly global organization. Their influence extended from the streets of Moscow to the boardrooms of London, from the ports of Hamburg to the suburbs of New Jersey. They were no longer just a Russian problem, but a global one, operating in a space where borders and jurisdictions were meaningless. Their success was a testament to their ability to adapt, innovate, and exploit the vulnerabilities of the modern world. Yet, for all their power, they remained elusive. their true extent known only to a select few within their inner circle. The stage was set for the next phase of their rise, one that would push the boundaries of their empire even further. The Bratva's ambition was boundless, and by the dawn of the 21st century, their operations had evolved into a sprawling web of criminal enterprises that stretched across continents. Their reach extended far beyond the drug trade and money laundering schemes that had fueled their initial rise. Now they were entrenched in industries that few would associate with organized crime, making their power even harder to detect and dismantle. Their methods became more sophisticated, their crimes more heinous, and their impact more far-reaching. One of their most insidious ventures was human trafficking. The fall of the Iron Curtain had created a migration crisis with countless men and women fleeing poverty and war in Eastern Europe and Central Asia in search of better opportunities in the West. The Bratva exploited this desperation with chilling efficiency, establishing trafficking networks that spanned multiple borders, promising victims jobs or a fresh start in countries like Germany, Italy, and the United States. They instead subjected them to a life of exploitation and abuse. Women were forced into sex work, while men were coerced into labor under inhumane conditions. The Bratva operated these networks with cold precision. They used forged documents, corrupt border officials, and safe houses across Europe to move their victims undetected. In one instance, a raid on a seemingly ordinary trucking company in Belgium uncovered a secret compartment in one of the vehicles. Hidden inside were over a dozen young women, terrified and malnourished, en route to an underground brothel in France. Investigators traced the operation back to the Bratva, but those at the top remained untouchable, shielded by layers of intermediaries and complicit officials. While human trafficking became one of their most profitable ventures, the Bratva also capitalized on the digital age, becoming pioneers in cybercrime. With access to some of the most talented hackers from Russia and neighboring countries, they created an empire in the virtual world. Early on, their efforts focused on credit card fraud and identity theft, but their ambitions quickly escalated. They began launching ransomware attacks on major corporations, encrypting critical data and demanding payments in cryptocurrency to release it. One such attack targeted a prominent healthcare network in the United States, crippling its operations for weeks. Doctors and nurses found themselves unable to access patient records, and surgeries had to be postponed. The ransom demand $20 million in Bitcoin was paid reluctantly, but the attackers left behind malware that continued to disrupt systems. The incident highlighted the Bratva's willingness to inflict harm on an unprecedented scale, demonstrating their complete disregard for the lives their crimes affected. The proceeds from these cybercrimes were funneled into even more ambitious operations. Using anonymous transactions and offshore accounts, the Bratva acquired assets in industries ranging from real estate to technology. They invested in startups that provided cover for their illicit activities, including companies specializing in encrypted communications and artificial intelligence. These businesses not only generated legitimate profits, but also served as platforms for laundering money and conducting covert operations. The sheer scale of the Bratva's activities became evident during a multinational investigation into a shipping company based in Odessa, Ukraine. On the surface, the company appeared legitimate, handling cargo shipments across the Black Sea and into Western Europe. However, a closer inspection revealed that its containers often carried more than their declared contents. Hidden among ordinary goods were drugs, counterfeit electronics, and even illegal firearms destined for conflict zones in the Middle East. The company's profits were astronomical, but its true purpose was far more sinister. Documents seized during the raid revealed connections between the shipping company and high-ranking officials in multiple countries. Bribes had been paid to customs agents, port authorities, and even local politicians to ensure that the illicit cargo moved without interference. The investigation exposed the extent to which the Bratva had corrupted institutions across Europe and Asia. But it also revealed a terrifying truth. The organization was far more decentralized than previously believed, with independent cells operating under a loose hierarchy. This structure made it nearly impossible to dismantle entirely, as taking down one branch of the operation barely made a dent in the whole. Amid the revelations, a defector from the Bratva emerged. offering to testify in exchange for protection. The man, a former lieutenant in charge of logistics, provided detailed accounts of smuggling routes, bribes, and even assassinations carried out on the orders of top bosses. His testimony was a breakthrough, leading to arrests in 5 countries and the seizure of millions of dollars in assets. However, just days before he was scheduled to testify in court, the defector disappeared. His car was found abandoned on a remote road, and traces of his blood were discovered inside, but no body was ever recovered. Authorities suspected a Bratva hit squad, but a deeper investigation revealed that the defector may have staged his own disappearance to escape both the law and the inevitable retaliation from his former associates. The Bratva's use of assassinations to silence dissent and eliminate threats became a hallmark of their operations. Over the years, numerous journalists, investigators, and rival criminals were found dead under suspicious circumstances. Each killing was meticulously planned, with no evidence linking the perpetrators to the crime. In some cases, the assassinations were carried out in public, designed to send a message. In others, they were so covert that the victims simply vanished, their fate remaining a mystery. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Bratva's global reach was their infiltration of political systems. In several countries, candidates with ties to the organization ran for public office, often winning by exploiting voter apathy or using intimidation tactics. Once in power, these individuals acted as gatekeepers, blocking investigations and ensuring that the Bratva's operations continued unhindered. In one notable case, a parliamentarian in Eastern Europe was exposed as a Bratva operative after investigators discovered emails detailing his role in facilitating the group's trafficking operations. The revelation sparked outrage, but the parliamentarian fled the country before he could be arrested, likely under the protection of his powerful allies. The Bratva's ability to adapt to changing circumstances and exploit vulnerabilities in the global system was unmatched. They thrived in a world where technology outpaced regulation, where borders were porous, and where greed often outweighed morality. Their network was no longer just a collection of criminals, it was a sprawling, decentralized empire with the resources and reach of a multinational corporation. As their power grew, so did the challenge of stopping them. Their crimes left a trail of devastation, but the Bratva itself remained a phantom, impossible to grasp and seemingly unstoppable. The Bratva's influence had reached a point where their operations no longer relied solely on brute force or intimidation. They had mastered the art of blending into the systems they exploited, leaving behind minimal traces of their true nature. By the early 2000s, their presence had become a shadow over the legitimate global economy. As governments struggled to adapt to the growing threat, the Bratva turned their focus to an even more lucrative arena, the manipulation of power itself. They sought to wield influence not only over illicit industries but also over institutions that shaped policy, law, and governance. One of their most effective tools in this new venture was their ability to corrupt democratic systems. In emerging democracies across Eastern Europe, the Bratva identified weak links in the political process. They funded candidates who would later repay the favor by obstructing investigations, passing favorable legislation, or providing insider access to state resources. Campaigns were quietly funded through untraceable shell companies, and election outcomes were influenced by bribery, blackmail, or outright vote tampering. This ensured that, regardless of who held power officially, the Bratva retained control behind the scenes. In one striking example, a political candidate in a small Balkan nation received significant campaign funding from what appeared to be a local charity. Subsequent investigations revealed that the charity was a front for laundering Bratva money. Once elected, the official prioritized infrastructure contracts for companies tied to the organization, funneling millions in taxpayer money into their coffers. This scheme not only enriched the Bratva but also entrenched their control over critical industries like transportation and energy, granting them leverage over both the economy and the government. Their reach extended far beyond politics. The Bratva began targeting multinational corporations, exploiting the globalized economy to their advantage. In one case, they infiltrated the supply chain of a major technology manufacturer. Through a series of complex transactions and dummy companies, they gained control of a key supplier, enabling them to smuggle counterfeit components into the legitimate market. The scheme went undetected for years, costing the company millions in damages, and tarnishing its reputation once the fraud was exposed. Corporate espionage became another weapon in their arsenal. Using a network of insiders, hackers, and intermediaries, the Bratva accessed proprietary information from some of the world's largest companies. Trade secrets were stolen and sold to competitors, while sensitive data was held for ransom. In one instance, a pharmaceutical company developing a groundbreaking drug lost years of research after a cyber attack traced back to Bratva-linked operatives. The stolen formula was later found in the hands of a foreign competitor, raising questions about the group's connections to state-sponsored actors. While these operations showcased the Bratva's sophistication, they also highlighted their willingness to exploit anyone and anything to achieve their goals. Human lives were collateral in their pursuit of power. This was evident in their growing involvement in environmental crimes, which often left devastating consequences for local communities. In South America, they partnered with illegal logging syndicates, extracting timber from protected rainforests and smuggling it into international markets. Entire ecosystems were destroyed, while indigenous communities were displaced or intimidated into silence. The profits, funneled through layers of intermediaries, further bolstered their global empire. In Africa, the Bratva became players in the illegal mining of precious minerals like gold and diamonds. They forged partnerships with warlords and corrupt officials, exploiting regions plagued by instability and weak governance. Workers, often operating under dire conditions, labored for meager wages while the Bratva reaped immense profits. These ventures not only fueled global markets, but also perpetuated cycles of violence and corruption in regions already struggling with poverty and conflict. The Bratva's appetite for control extended to the media, where they recognized the power of narrative in shaping public opinion. They began acquiring stakes in media outlets across Europe and Asia, subtly influencing the coverage of political events, criminal investigations, and even cultural trends. Investigative journalists who dared to expose the Bratva's activities often found themselves targeted by lawsuits, smear campaigns, or worse. Several high-profile murders of reporters were linked to the organization, though proving direct involvement remained elusive. In one chilling instance, a journalist who had been investigating the Bratva's connections to a European energy company was found dead in an apparent car accident. However, further scrutiny revealed evidence of tampering with the vehicle's brakes. While the case was officially ruled an accident, whispers of the Bratva's involvement silenced others who might have pursued similar stories. The Bratva's influence wasn't limited to the shadows. They began hosting lavish events, presenting themselves as legitimate businesspeople and philanthropists. Charity galas, cultural festivals, and sporting events were sponsored by entities tied to the organization, further blurring the line between criminality and respectability. These public displays served as a form of reputation laundering, allowing the Bratva to mingle with politicians, celebrities, and industry leaders without suspicion. For many, the allure of wealth and power overshadowed the darker truths behind the facade. Despite their dominance, cracks in the Bratva's empire began to show. Internal rivalries, driven by greed and ambition, occasionally erupted into violence. In one notable instance, a power struggle between two factions led to a series of high-profile assassinations across Moscow. These killings, though carried out discreetly, caught the attention of law enforcement and exposed divisions within the organization. As the Bratva expanded globally, maintaining loyalty and cohesion among its far-flung operatives became an increasing challenge. Law enforcement agencies, too, began to adapt. International task forces were formed, pooling resources and intelligence to combat the Bratva's activities. Sophisticated surveillance techniques, undercover operations, and cyber forensics were employed to track their movements and disrupt their operations. While progress was slow, these efforts began to yield results, leading to arrests, asset seizures, and the dismantling of several key networks. However, for every success, there were setbacks. Corruption within law enforcement and judicial systems continued to undermine efforts to hold the Bratva accountable. Witnesses were silenced, evidence disappeared, and trials were derailed by procedural errors or outright sabotage. The Bratva had built their empire on a foundation of fear, corruption, and adaptability, and dismantling it required an equally relentless approach. By the mid-2010s, the Bratva stood at a crossroads. Their influence was vast, but so was the scrutiny they faced. The world was beginning to wake up to the true scale of their operations, and governments, corporations, and individuals were no longer content to turn a blind eye. Yet, even as the walls closed in, the Bratva remained a force to be reckoned with, their resilience a testament to the dark genius of their organization. Their story was far from over, but the seeds of their reckoning had been sown. The Bratva's sprawling empire faced mounting challenges as the global fight against organized crime intensified. Years of unchecked expansion had drawn the attention of governments and international organizations, forcing a coalition of nations to address the Bratva's reach. Coordinated efforts between law enforcement agencies, intelligence operatives, and cybersecurity experts began to uncover the hidden mechanisms behind their operations. For the first time in decades, cracks were forming in the seemingly impenetrable facade and the Bratva's dominance. The first significant breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a financial whistleblower within a major European bank. This individual, frustrated by years of complicity in laundering Bratva funds, leaked thousands of documents detailing transactions, offshore accounts, and shell companies used by the organization. The information revealed a vast network of financial manipulation spanning multiple continents, implicating several high-profile banks and financial institutions. Investigators now had a roadmap of the Bratva's financial architecture, allowing them to freeze assets and disrupt cash flows critical to their operations. Armed with this intelligence, law enforcement began targeting the Bratva's middlemen, those who operated just outside the organization's core but were essential to its day-to-day functions. Lawyers, accountants, and logistics coordinators found themselves under intense scrutiny. Many were arrested and offered leniency in exchange for cooperation. While some refused to talk, others provided critical insights into the Bratva's hierarchy, operational methods, and communication systems. These disclosures led to a series of coordinated raids across Europe and Asia, seizing millions in illicit goods and dismantling several key trafficking routes. One of the most high-profile operations took place in Spain, where a luxurious villa served as the hub for a major Bratva cell. Surveillance had confirmed that the villa was used to host meetings with corrupt officials, store cash and contraband, and plan international operations. When police stormed the property, they uncovered a cache of documents linking the cell to arms deals in Africa and drug smuggling in South America. Despite the success, the cell's leader escaped through an underground tunnel, underscoring the Bratva's preparedness and resourcefulness. The Bratva's adaptability was put to the test as their financial and logistical networks came under siege. They responded by shifting operations to less scrutinized regions, exploiting nations with weaker governance and enforcement capabilities. In Southeast Asia, they established new drug routes, while in the Middle East, they forged alliances with local militias to traffic weapons and stolen goods. The rapid redeployment of resources highlighted their resilience, but it also exposed the challenges of maintaining cohesion across an increasingly fragmented organization. As the pressure mounted, internal divisions within the Bratva began to deepen, with leaders scattered across different countries and factions vying for control of dwindling resources. Rivalries turned violent. In one instance, a disagreement over profits from a lucrative smuggling route led to a series of assassinations between factions in Istanbul and Dubai. These feuds, while devastating for those involved, presented opportunities for law enforcement to exploit the fractures within the organization. Informants, motivated by revenge or self-preservation, began to emerge, offering insights into the Bratva's inner workings. Meanwhile, technological advancements played a crucial role in the fight against the Bratva. Cybersecurity teams tracked encrypted communications, decrypted files, and monitored cryptocurrency transactions to disrupt the group's cybercrime operations. One groundbreaking effort involved tracing a ransomware attack that had crippled a major hospital system in Canada. By following the digital trail, investigators identified the server hosting the malware and linked it to a Bratva-controlled network in Eastern Europe. The subsequent operation led to the arrest of several key hackers and the recovery of millions in stolen funds. Despite these victories, the Bratva demonstrated an uncanny ability to adapt and retaliate. In one brazen move, they targeted a law enforcement database, exposing the identities of undercover operatives and compromising ongoing investigations. The leak not only endangered lives but also served as a chilling reminder of the Bratva's reach and willingness to strike back. This escalation forced agencies to enhance their security measures and rethink their strategies, focusing on long-term infiltration rather than immediate arrests. The battle against the Bratva reached a turning point when an international summit on organized crime brought together leaders from over 50 nations. The summit resulted in the creation of a unified task force, pooling resources and intelligence to combat transnational criminal organizations. This unprecedented level of cooperation led to a series of high-profile arrests, including several Bratva operatives who had evaded justice for years. These arrests dealt a significant blow to the organization's leadership, creating a vacuum at the top that further destabilized the group. As the Bratva's empire began to unravel, the human cost of their operations became increasingly apparent. Survivors of trafficking networks, exploited laborers, and communities devastated by environmental crimes shared their stories, shining a light on the group's atrocities. These testimonies galvanized public opinion, putting additional pressure on governments to act decisively. Documentaries, news reports, and exposes painted a vivid picture of the Bratva's impact, dismantling the myth of their untouchable power and exposing the harsh realities of their crimes. Yet, even as their global influence waned, remnants of the Bratva continued to operate in the shadows. Smaller cells adapted to the new environment, focusing on low-profile crimes that drew less attention. Some leaders rebranded themselves as legitimate businessmen, using their wealth and connections to secure positions of influence. These remnants, while diminished in scale, posed a lingering threat, capable of resurging if left unchecked. The collapse of the Bratva's global operations marked the end of an era, but it also highlighted the challenges of combating organized crime in an interconnected world. The Bratva had thrived on the vulnerabilities of modern systems, weak regulations, corrupt officials, and the anonymity of digital transactions. Addressing these vulnerabilities required not only law enforcement but also systemic changes to governance, finance, and technology. In the aftermath, the world was left with a sobering realization. The Bratva's rise had been fueled not just by their ruthlessness but by the complacency and complicity of the systems they exploited. While their empire may have crumbled, the conditions that allowed it to flourish remained. The fight against organized crime was far from over, and the lessons of the Bratva's global reach served as a stark reminder of what was at stake. As governments, organizations, and individuals reflected on the Bratva's legacy, one thing became clear. The true battle was not just against the criminals themselves, but against the environments that allowed them to exist. The Bratva's story, a chilling testament to the intersection of greed, corruption, and ambition, served as both a cautionary tale and a call to action for a world determined to never again allow such an empire to rise. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the shadows of the Bratva. This story is a reminder of the lengths some will go for power, and the challenges faced by those who dare to oppose them. Stay curious, stay vigilant, and as always, join us next time on Mystery Minds, where the truth is darker than fiction.